I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. If you're like us, you'll have known that the price of your house has done nothing but gone up since you've purchased it. For years, we've heard about the housing bubble in the 905 region, and yet no one has really looked into the reasons why. That is until now. Mike Moffatt is an economics professor with the Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario, as well as a senior director with the Institute for Smart Prosperity, a think tank at the University of Ottawa. Recently, he has written a series of articles on his personal blog outlining the underlying causes of our rising housing prices in the 905 and Ontario at large. In summary, an influx of foreign students and Canadians from other provinces has caused a population boom in Toronto and the 905 region. Yet housing policy has not kept up with the demand that this has placed on the housing market. The result has been bidding wars that have driven up prices astronomically, forcing younger families out of the market and many to seek housing options outside the 905 and even the country. Today, we invited Mike on to share his research and what the implications this can have for the Canadian economy, as well as our communities at large. Now, before we head into the interview, we'd like to remind you that if you're enjoying the work we're doing here on the 905er, please support us through our Patreon. For a small fee of only $7 Canadian a month, you'll be helping us produce this great content. As well, we are hosting monthly video calls for our patrons to get their feedback and see what we can do better. Links are in the show notes to sign up. For now, on with the show. I would like to thank Mike Moffatt for joining us on the 905er today. Thank you, Mike, for taking the time from your very busy schedule to come on to talk housing prices in the 905 and Ontario as a whole today. Thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me.
Your piece on your personal blog on your Medium website, and we'll have links to it in the show notes for our listeners, is titled Ontarians on the Move. And what I found interesting about it was that you've kind of put some data behind a lot of the assumptions that we in the 905 have about our housing prices in the region. And I'm wondering, would you just be able to summarize quickly for our listeners what your findings are in your research?
Sure. And this is something I've been looking at for a few years. And the genesis of this was actually back when I sold a house in London, Ontario, back in 2017. And this was a time where not a lot was going on in London economically. The manufacturing jobs largely hadn't come back. The university and college was doing pretty well. But overall, it was not an economy that was doing particularly well. And despite that, there was a bidding war for my house. It ended up going 15% over asking. And all three sort of families who were involved in this bidding war we're all currently living in downtown Toronto. So I thought, this is strange. Why is it that so many people from Toronto want to move to London, Ontario at a time where the economy really wasn't doing that well? Normally you would think if the economy is doing well, house prices would go up. If the economy is not doing well, house prices would be flat and going down. But here was a bit of a paradox. And it turns out the sort of genesis of the piece was that Ontario started to see a population boom around early 2016. And it was a combination of international workers, visa workers. So think like the sort of express entry, some of the changes that had been made there, other non-permanent residents like international students and so on, saw the province grow from adding about 100,000 people a year to adding 200,000 people a year. Well, all of those people need to sort of live somewhere. And what happened was that, around 2015, 2016, the Toronto market started to get really hot again. Toronto got hot, Mississauga got hot, Oakville got hot. And young families that wanted to start a family couldn't afford those markets. So they kept driving further afield. They kept going to Kitchener, and then Kitchener gets hot. So then those families start driving to Woodstock. Woodstock gets hot. And then finally they end up in London. So what the series looks at is these migration patterns that are all sort of driven by this search for affordable real estate, or at least real estate that families can afford. So we're seeing this across the province, and this was all before COVID. This was all before COVID turned the real estate market completely bananas. But even before then, this big boom in population growth spread throughout the province and caused rising housing prices for about a 4 or 5 year period.
So, I mean, essentially what you're talking about is kind of a ripple effect of, we have, as you said, these new Canadians, newcomers to the province, settling in the Toronto GTA area, most because that's where, a lot of their communities are, understandably. But it's kind of like, if you think about it, you drop this gigantic boulder of population into a pond, you're going to start these ripple effects permeating out from that area. I'm wondering, like, do you see any signs of this stopping at any point geographically in the province? Like, is Ottawa the where the crest of the wave breaks, or is it just going to be kind of going all the way, up to Thunder Bay and beyond?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell because, again, we had this sort of pandemic, COVID kind of changed everything. But we were seeing signs of this as far as, if we go southwest, as far as like Chatham, Kent, Sarnia, and so on. Places that are about 300 kilometers, 200 miles from Toronto. That's exactly what happened. We had an influx of people come in, which in a lot of ways is really great for the province. If you look at the age of people who are coming in, they're all sort of between 18 and 25. They had advanced degrees. They're working in our tech sector, either in Toronto or Kitchener, Waterloo, which is a really good thing for the province. You have a province where the baby boomers are getting older. We're having this sort of, these sort of demographic issues. To have a influx of really talented young people is fantastic. But what happened was our ability or our desire to build houses and apartments for everyone caused this sort of ripple effect that we hadn't really planned on going from adding 100,000 people a year, which we had been sort of consistently for most of the 21st century, to all of a sudden adding 200,000 people per year. Now, whether or not this is going to continue is a really interesting question, because part of what was driving it was Canadian policy. But I think part of what was driving it was Donald Trump, to be honest, that it wasn't necessarily that the newcomers were coming from the United States, but you had talented tech workers, talented students who, maybe in 2012, 2013, 2014 might have settled in the United States and are now going, with the situation with the visas in the U.S. and the overall political situation, I'm not going to go to Silicon Valley. I'm going to go to Toronto or Vancouver or somewhere else instead. It's tough to say whether or not those people are going to come back. Now we've got a Biden administration that's a lot more friendly to foreign tech talents. And a housing market here in Ontario, which is really, really expensive. Like you can go buy property in Texas for about half the price you can in Ontario. So you have to wonder, if you're a talented, you're a talented worker who's deciding to move to North America. Right now Ontario has some real downsides, and we might not see those tech workers and international students come back at quite the same rate.
So if and just to sort of clarify for our listeners, when we're talking about sort of seeing surprising levels of population growth in places like London and further away from Toronto, which I know certainly wasn't predicted in any kind of provincial planning necessarily, that's not immigrants going straight to London. That's immigrants coming to the GTA and then people in GTA moving out to London. So what are they doing out there? I mean, are they commuting back to the GTA, or are they retiring, or are they finding work out there?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting question. So, and we have to sort of break down, this is where it gets kind of technical, break down who is it that's moving to Ontario. And there's basically three tranches of people. Sort of immigrants are actually they've gone up, but when we mean immigrant, it means that somebody's moving to Canada and actually taking Canadian citizenship, is going to be here permanently. That has gone up, but that's not actually the biggest category that's gone up, and most of those do settle in the GTA, Toronto, Mississauga, Brampton, and so on, and so they're settling in Toronto. Visa workers are also mostly settling in Toronto and Kitchener-Waterloo because of the tech boom, and some in Ottawa as well. The Ottawa market is a little bit different than the rest of southwestern Ontario, but overall, they're disproportionately settling settling in the Toronto market. International students are a little bit more spread out. So we are actually seeing quite a bit of them in London. We're getting a lot in Windsor and so on. So they're a little bit more dispersed. But what we are seeing is what I call the sort of musical chairs effect. And the idea is that Toronto gets expensive. So young families in Toronto, and often those young families are recent migrants to Toronto, either immigrants or visa workers or so on. They're like, oh, I want to start a family. I want to get out of this 1-bedroom condo, but I can't afford a 3-bedroom place in this market. So again, I'm going to go move to Kitchener-Waterloo. Then the Kitchener-Waterloo people get sort of priced out. They move to Brantford. The Brantford people get priced out, move to Woodstock, and you get this sort of musical chairs effect. We don't have great data on what's happening to the people who sort of, have to move further afield. There is commuting data in the census, but the census only comes out every 5 years. So I suspect what was happening was even before the crisis, you were seeing a lot more work from home, or at least sort of hybrid work from home models where somebody would move to Woodstock or London, but still be working in a Mississauga, but they wouldn't be going to work every day. Maybe they'd be working from home 2 to 3 days a week and so on. But what we do know is that the jobs were still largely getting created in the GTA, in both 416 and 905. So a lot of those people who were moving to Woodstock and Ingersoll and Ilderton or London still had their jobs in the 416 and 905, and either were commuting or doing work from home.
It sounds like the trend that we're hearing now, like the telecommuting because of COVID, the how everybody's staying at home and doing the Zoom call like we're doing now. It sounded like that trend kind of started before COVID, is what you're telling me, and that COVID kind of just sped it up or made it into the mainstream. That I think like these trends that we're seeing developing because of COVID, I don't see them going away. And I'm wondering what does that mean for the housing market as people say, well, I can live in Ingersoll and still have the 6-figure job in Toronto.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. That Ontario, particularly Southern Ontario, was a little bit ahead of things when it came from work from home, just because of these real estate pressures. I think it allowed us to be easier to adjust, and that's a bit conjecture. We really don't have good data on this, but I think you're right that I think some of these trends are going to continue, which will mean that there is going to be less pressure on the Torontos and the Oakvilles and the Miltons and so on, where you say, okay, well, I can go work or go live in a place like Tillsonburg. We think of like Tillsonburg, the Stomp and Tom song about tobacco workers and everything like that. That's not the case anymore. Like Tillsonburg is getting to be a very, it's a suburb of Toronto now, or maybe a suburb of Hamilton. It's getting to be more of a suburban place with a lot of sort of 3 and 4 bedroom houses built. And I think we're going to see more of that, as we can do sort of more work from home, and you look at, okay, well, where can we actually buy, or where can we actually build suburban homes? It's going to be in the places like your Tillsonburgs and your Brantfords and so on. And I think what we might see from the work from home, because it does have certain disadvantages as well, right? That, not everybody likes working at their kitchen table. You can't see it right now, but I'm in my kid's playroom, but I've just got the camera set up, so it looks at least somewhat professional. Not everybody, not everybody is a fan of that. So you may end up seeing these sort of hybrid models where you get the sort of co-working places that you could go to 2 to 3 days a week, where you could have your own sort of little area. Your employer's still, in Bay Street, downtown Toronto, but you're working in a co-working center in a Woodstock that has, better video facilities, has a big photocopier, things like that. So we might see that. And, that could create some interesting opportunities for commercial real estate in these sort of mid-sized communities where you could get more of these sort of regional, smaller branch offices popping up.
Overall, this to me seems like kind of a good thing. That if population is spreading, we have a big province, to say the least. If people are able to have a wider choice of places to go, and they're not being, they're to an extent being forced out by housing prices, but it's also a matter of kind of choice that most most people would rather live with a little bit of space, which is why we have suburbs, I guess. This is a good development. And if it means that people can do that, I love that kind of hybrid model, because most people, we like to socialize, we like to see people in real life. But we also like to spend time in our own houses and with our own families and not sitting in a car on the 403. Is that how you see it?
Certainly can be. And I think like most changes, and, I'm going to wear my social scientist economist hat here. Most social changes have both upsides and downsides. And the key is always to try and accelerate the upsides and manage the downsides. So certainly, a future where we're a little less house poor, where we can have more spaces, we're not buying homes for 7, 8, 9 times, 10 times income, I think would be a fantastic thing. It's also really good for these smaller communities. You had a lot of smaller communities across southwestern Ontario. Again, I'm from London. My parents are from a place called Wayland's Corners, population 4, which is just outside of Lucan, which is the big city of about 4,500 people. Places like that have been shrinking for the last 20 to 30 years. So, to get a bunch of talented young people in this and to help, those sort of Main Street properties, get the coffee shops and the restaurants and things like that back, I think are fantastic for these smaller communities. So I think there's a lot of upside here. But I'm also a guy who works for an environmental NGO by the day. I worry about environmental issues. So you go, okay, well, what is this going to mean if we're building a lot of, using up some of Canada's best farmland, actually the planet's best farmland, to build up, 2,500 square foot 4-bedroom houses? What happens if we're driving everywhere? So, I think we do need to sort of manage that, figure out, how can we get more infill? How can we have more climate friendly housing? How can we have better transportation options so it's not people having to drive everywhere? How can we get more sort of broadband issues? Because that's going to be one big one. If everybody's moving out to Wayland Corners, I can tell you firsthand that if you're out there and you want decent broadband speed, what you do is you drive to Lucan and you get out your laptop and you go to Tim Hortons, and you either go inside the Tim Hortons or you're in the parking lot. And sort of joke about that, but we've seen during the pandemic a lot of school kids doing their homework outside of a Starbucks or a Tim Hortons in the parking lot because they don't have adequate broadband. So there are, I think on net is probably a good thing, but there's a bunch of challenges that we're going to have to navigate, and it's going to require some creative thinking at all levels.
I was just going to say, Mike, you're kind of preaching to the converted there. My in-laws live in a similar situation, and yeah, the broadband is absolutely brutal in the rural parts of this province. I did want to touch upon one of the things that you've been saying on your piece is that the housing issue is a matter of like a supply and demand principle. Basically, the supply is not catching up with demand in the province. So right now, there's somebody listening to this podcast and they're shouting at their iPhone or whatever, saying, "Well, why don't we just build more housing? Why don't we just let the developers build? That's what they want to do. Why don't we just let them build?" And I'm wondering, is this a failure of the free market to kind of catch up with that demand that's out there?
Well, I would say that the housing market has components of it that are free market, but a lot of it's not. I mean, it's a very sort of planned economy, and particularly areas where the housing market doesn't work too well. So I would say, Silicon Valley. It's like we literally took the worst part of free market economics, where the sort of, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer, and the worst parts of Stalinist planning and sort of combine them into a hybrid, where that's it's exactly like, okay, right. You've got this sort of planning and everybody gets a veto and everything's really complicated and you have multiple levels of government and nothing gets done. So, and I think that's, the concern I have with the housing. It's not that we failed on the free market side or that we failed on the planning side, but we took the worst elements of both and sort of fused them together. Again, what's going to happen in the future is really going to depend on whether or not those international students and visa workers come back. But if they do, yeah, we're going to have to do something on the planning side. we are going to have more infill. People are still going to want, some people are going to want to live in Tillsonburg, but other people are going to want to live in Toronto. And trying to figure out how we can both build that infill and at the same time get community acceptance is really hard. And you read these stories about places going up in East York, and I don't mean to pick on East York because this happens everywhere, but community members in East York saying, well, you're going to take out this parking lot, and this parking lot is the heart of our community, and you go like, well,
it's a parking lot.
Come on, guys. But I live in a neighborhood in Ottawa, and we do the exact same thing here. So trying to figure out how we can build more housing and still have it. Still have it go through all the sort of zoning rules and still have it be, get community acceptance. Because if people won't accept it, the politicians are going to sort of follow that. So that is going to limit what we can do. But certainly, I think we do need more housing issues. And again, as being somebody who's more environmentally minded, I have real concerns that if we don't solve this infill issue, what's basically going to happen is over the next 20 or 30 years, we're just going to pave over the greenbelt because we simply won't have the political acceptance to keep it. That you're not going to price out an entire generation of kids out of the housing market and not have that have political consequences.
What we're seeing, one of the things we're seeing now, and to an extent, it's the Caledonia story is a story about First Nations, but it's also about the pressure on developers and them kind of leaping over the greenbelt. So Caledonia is literally inches outside the greenbelt. And it's like, well, here we don't have to worry about all those regulations that we do if we're in Hamilton. And that seems to be a real issue. And yeah, I mean, you're not stopping sprawl at that point. All you're doing is moving your sprawl somewhere else, which is just as bad. So yeah, it's almost like every city needs its greenbelt, but we also ultimately we have to go the intensification route. There's no real question about that from an environmental perspective. But seems to me, and you can disagree with this or whatever, that the craziness in the Canadian system is like we're saying, okay, we need to intensify. Everybody agrees. But you can't build in single-family home neighborhoods because they're middle class and we don't want to upset them. So the only place you can build is an urban growth center or the absolute downtown, and you can only build a high-rise. And it's like we've taken the whole of Ontario and taken it down to about a 2 square mile area in the whole province. And it's like no wonder we're getting problems when we're going from one extreme of just let everybody just build out forever, and we'll have more sprawl nation, and going to the other of okay, the only you can't build anywhere now. Well, it's kind of a leading question, but is the answer this kind of in the middle development, this kind of what's called gentle density, things like that? Do you think that's the way to go?
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to figure out, again, how to get that community acceptance. I would love, and it all comes down to the municipal level. And I think we're going to have a series of sort of carrots and sticks. I think this is one sort of opportunity, COVID has created that our municipalities are in need of money. So I would love to see the federal and provincial governments come in and say, hey, look, we're willing to help you out financially with this, but we're going to need to see some zoning changes, and we're going to need to see some more sort of aggressive plans when it comes to infill and that missing middle. Because you're right. I mean, you either get a bunch of single family homes or you get these huge towers. There's we can't my neighborhood in Ottawa. I live in a neighborhood called the Glebe. We're not building that much big things. And then over in Little Italy, which isn't far from here, we have currently like Ottawa's largest condo tower getting built, and there's like nothing in between. So it's like you can have 3 floors or 63, but you can't have anything in between. And I don't think that's particularly sustainable. But I think you also, if I could for a moment, I actually think you also hit on something that's really important. That's the sort of unintended consequences of a lot of our policies. That you're right. I think in the sense that the Greenbelt didn't constrain sprawl; it just moved it. Now, I think, again, I'm an environmentalist. I want to keep the green belt. I think overall it was a good policy, but you have to have those other supporting policies. And I think that happens too often with housing, where we try and solve a problem. And this is a classic public policy problem. We solve one problem and create another. So one of the things we saw back and you guys would probably remember it better than I will, but back in 2017 and early 2018, there was a big house price bubble in the GTA, centered around Mississauga, but just in general in the 905. And then both the federal and the provincial government came out with a series of policies to burst that bubble. Right, there was policies around, the down payments you had to put on $1 million home. We saw some interest rate rises and a number of policies that way to try and slow that growth in Mississauga and Oakville and downtown Toronto. Well, what ended up happening was, yes, it constrained those markets for a while. It kind of caused those market freeze. But then that's when we really saw the home prices pick up in London and Woodstock, because it didn't eliminate that demand for family housing. All it did was just push it down the 401. So, we have to be really careful in these sort of public policies, particularly when you're fighting the symptoms of it. When we go, oh, well, the symptoms are a bunch of speculators and high home prices, so we need to burst this bubble. Well, we successfully did that, but then we sort of kicked a bunch of families down the 401, and they end up just commuting back to Toronto if they're not working from home. So we have to be really, really careful with the sort of unintended consequences of policies.
I was just going to say, that's something we always read in the media, like in the Globe Mail. It's like, the Ontario, the GTA housing bubble. The bubble's going to burst. So how long can the bubble stay? And I'm wondering, because I believe words matter. Are we framing this in the wrong context? Like that? Because I've been hearing all these stories about the GTA housing bubble for 10 plus years now. It hasn't burst. It shows no signs of bursting. Like houses on my street, I live in a very modest house. They're going for just shy of $1 million now, and I don't see that. I don't see that price plummeting anytime soon. Are we really? Are we not framing this conversation properly to really get to address the solutions we need to put in place?
Yeah, I think that's right. So one of my hobbies is to go back into like Google News and search by date and go Toronto housing bubble and then search year 2013. You will literally find, like, every week in 2013, there was an article about Toronto's housing bubble, Toronto's condo boom, that this was soon going to burst. Prices in Toronto have more than doubled, have almost tripled since 2013. If you had listened to the Toronto media back in 2013, you would be absolutely broke right now. You wouldn't have a home, but you might own shares in Sears or something. I don't know, or maybe you bought some oil stocks. And predictions are hard, right? And I'm sure I will say 5 things on this podcast that 5 years from now will be cringeworthy. So that's sort of I fully understand that. I would say we have to split out what was happening pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, yeah, I think it was largely driven by sort of supply and demand fundamentals. Yes, for all this talk of this bubble bursting in 2017, 2018, prices went up to their pre-peak level within like 18 months, right? It was, you had this big escalation of prices. It came down about 15 to 20%. And then it went back up and, it was like nothing had changed. I think during the pandemic, things have gotten weird. And I see a very good, strong case for a pandemic, because it's not just Toronto. Like you're seeing, North Bay prices are up like $75,000. Most communities in Ontario, prices are up between $100,000 and $200,000. And that's not really driven by population growth or any sort of supply and demand fundamentals. That's driven by really low interest rates coupled with white collar professionals who have saved a lot of money during this pandemic because they're not going on vacation, they're not driving to work, their expenses are way down. And we're seeing a variety of asset classes. Like I'm a sports card fan. I'm a sports card fan. You look like every week, like there's a new record, like some Wayne Gretzky rookie card has sold for new amounts. We saw what happened to, we see what happens to Bitcoin, that whole sort of GameStop price escalation in January. So right now, it is getting driven by some just funny, crazy money. And I could see a correction in that. And the silly thing is, like, even if house prices went down 30%, we're just back where we are at the start of the pandemic, right? So even a massive correction just brings us back to prices from early 2020, which were already incredibly high. So, it's kind of shown how out of hand things have gotten. And again, before the pandemic, I would argue it largely was driven by fundamentals. Since the start of the pandemic, it is really just some funny money pushing up the value of everything.
It actually raises an interesting point, which is somewhat of a tangent from what we're talking about. But for every person that the pandemic has been a disaster for, there's someone, usually middle class, who it's actually not been bad for. There's an interesting side to this that the people who have really suffered through this thing have been the people who always seem to suffer. So racialized people, working class people on low incomes. And, as usual, the people coming out smiling are the people who were smiling to start with. How do you think this is going to shake down? Do you think, I guess those people buying houses who were in downtown Toronto or wherever are thinking this is a permanent change. I'm not going back to the office. So this is my new normal, regardless of vaccines and the rest of it. So do you think that's kind of evidence of a permanent change, or do you think that we are seeing a bubble now, that people have done something weird for a year and they're going to regret it?
I'm going to say something that's going to be cringeworthy in 5 years. I make predictions are hard.
Podcasts last forever.
I would. Yeah, exactly. So I would say that within the next 24 months, I think it's more likely than not we do see a correction. In my mind, it's just how large is it? If it's 10%, then at a time when house prices are up 35% a year, that's not a big deal. If it's more than that, then that becomes problematic, particularly if you were one of the people who bought at the top of the bubble. But yeah, I do, the longer this goes on, and I tend to be a skeptic in the sense that I tend to, whenever there's any sort of discussion of this changes everything, I always bet the under. I always think that's the safe bet, that more things stay the same than they change. But I'm starting to come around to this idea that particularly the work from home thing, that this may end up being more of a permanent change than we think. And again, the one I look at, maybe it's because I spend most of my time at universities, is whether or not the international students come back at the same rate. I think that could really change the dynamics of this province. Because we hear a lot that what's driving up home prices is international money, which is true, but I think it's a little bit misleading. I think people sort of think of like Russian oligarchs, buying up large portions of Tilsonburg or something ridiculous like that. But what it largely is kids coming over, sort of upper class kids coming over from China or Taiwan or India or someplace that their parents are fairly well off. And they go, well, my kid's going to be here for 4 years. So instead of renting a place, why don't I just buy a small house or buy a condo and things like that? And that's been really driving up a lot of the real estate prices. It has been sort of foreign money, but not in this weird sort of speculative sense that we think about, but in rather of like, okay, well, you've got some high income individuals and their kids are coming over, so they're buying property for their kids, and that's nothing unique and international. Again, I'm from London, Ontario. We've had generations of rich kids from Toronto who go to Western and their parents, buy them a condo or apartment or a small house. So if you live in a college or university town, you're used to that. But now, the kids are coming from Taiwan instead of Toronto. So that's the big question to me, whether or not the international students come back at the same rate. If they do, then I think the correction, if we have one, will be relatively mild. If we don't, and we don't have that same level of international money coming in, things could get ugly in a couple of years.
When you say ugly, I guess. I mean, ugly for homeowners, ugly for people, for property owners. I mean, we keep on talking about the shortage of affordable housing, which is almost a separate thing. And I mean, one of my kind of pet peeves, I guess, is this idea that we're expecting the market to provide affordable housing when the market wants to make the most money it can. No, why would we build the cheap stuff? You know. How do you think? I mean, how does that all fit into this picture of like you say, the communist market?
Yeah, and that's that's the sort of I say the worst parts of both worlds, where we don't you don't think of sort of an upside for communism, but one of the good things that communism tended to do in a lot of these countries is build a lot of cheap, low income, kind of brutalist cement housing for people. And that's a sort of good side of communism that we're not getting here, right? We're not getting governments building a lot of cheap housing. And that's been one of the, I've been largely focusing on what this means for middle-class families. But, one of the real tragedies of this is what it means for the sort of lower 20% of the population. We saw starting in about 2017 or so, right when the population started increasing, longer lines or longer waiting lists, I should say, for social housing. It had been relatively flat, and then all of a sudden, the wait list for social housing were going up 8, 9, 10% a year. So it was affecting the lower end of the market as well. And this is a big problem. And you're right, the market is not going to solve that simply because there's not enough money and not enough land to do that profitably. If you can build a bunch of 1-bedroom condos and sell them to 25-year-old tech workers, you're going to do that instead of selling it to the single mom who's just struggling to get by. So I think there is a real role here for government to do something about social housing, do something about the homelessness problems, and you're only going to solve that with shovels in the ground, and you're going to have to do that in urban centers, because it's one thing for dad's an accountant and we're going, okay, we're going to go move in Tillsonburg and maybe we'll work from home. But if you clean hotel rooms in Toronto, you're not going to move to Tillsonburg. I mean, you just can't, right? There's no job opportunities there for you, or at least not nearly enough. The commuting is not really an option, and obviously you can't work from home. So, that's sort of social housing for and that's a sort of, cleaning hotels in Toronto is our best case scenario. And then you have people who are even more economically marginalized than that. That housing has to be in the large urban centers. And the only, Mark is not going to build that. That's only government can do that.
And I think people listening to this podcast have heard me go on about this before, but I come originally from a country which has huge sort of fields and fields of socialized, what we call council housing. That's usually pretty high quality, and usually, they're not really building it anymore. But then the stock they have is still pretty extensive. And I feel like there's the mistake in North America. We think, well, we can't pay for everything. It's like, well, no, people still pay rent in these places. These places pay for themselves decades ago. It's not a burden on society for municipalities to be basically the biggest landlord in the area. So it's I'm going off on my own rant now, but it's very much something I feel we need to have a sort of grown-up discussion about that just is not happening at present, as far as I can see, anyway.
Well, absolutely. No, so, I mean, we essentially stopped as a province in a country building social housing around 1975 or so. And it was just for that reason. It's like, well, the government can't afford to do this, and, it's costing money. And I go, well, it's a couple problems with that argument. I mean, first, you still pay for it anyway. Like, if you don't provide adequate housing, what are all the bills that you have to pay, like all of the social problems that cause. But secondly, just from a pragmatic sense of point of view, imagine if the federal and provincial government had bought up a ton of land in Toronto in the late 70s. What would that be worth now? It's this very sort of short-term view of like, oh, we're not going to build anything because there'll be some bills today and we'll have a deficit today. But, imagine what those buildings and land would be worth now. And then, when Roland, you're right, all of the sort of revenue from the tenants that would have lived there, that, those things would have more than paid for themselves, but we weren't willing for whatever reason to take that sort of the short-term bill. So we pay for it in the long run. And we see this again and again in public policy. When we sold off the 407, it's another example. It's like, well, we want to sort of solve the deficit, so we're going to sell off this big piece of infrastructure and get a couple billion now. Okay, well, what would be that worth if we still own that and still had gotten the revenue? So, there's been this real short-termism when it comes to infrastructure projects for the last 40 some odd years, and that certainly includes housing.
So I want to, because I see we're coming up on our deadline to end this. So I kind of want to finish off the podcast on a bit of a broader note. I kind of want to get a sense of, if we don't solve this issue now, a lot of our economy is tied to housing, land, real estate, land development. Where personal finance is all tied towards the idea of, you own a house, you build some equity in your house, and you're able to build on top of that. If we don't get a handle on this now, Mike, like what's the potential consequences for the Canadian economy as a whole down the road?
Well, I think you're essentially going to have a lost generation, right? Because, again, I'm in my 40s. We bought our first house in 2004 for, brand new house, 3 bedrooms in London, Ontario for $168,000, which at the time was like more money than I had ever seen. And I thought, like, oh my goodness, like how am I ever going to pay off this mortgage? And it's now, the house is probably, if someone were to sell it now, go for 3 to 4 times that. But you have this generation of younger people that, unless they come from well-off parents, they can't break into the market, and they're constantly renting. They can't save money. I think that has economic consequences, right? That they're not able to sort of build any kind of savings and sort of create roots in the community. But I think it also has political consequences, right? That you've just got this generation who feels like they've been cheated, and they're not entirely wrong. And, I think the sort of worst case scenario of this, I mean, we're seeing these sort of effects play out in places like Silicon Valley, right? Where it's like, okay, nobody can kind of afford to live there, and you've got all this money and all this real estate, and all of the sort of social problems that, that we're seeing in the Bay Area. And that was at least tolerable when things were going well. But now you're seeing a lot of tech companies go, well, we don't want to be here anymore. It doesn't make sense for anymore. We're going to go move to Colorado or Austin or someplace else. And that's what I worry for the Toronto and Vancouver markets specifically. Like they could be real engines of economic growth, or we could, or they could just be, playgrounds for the rich, and the sort of the talented middle class kids have to go somewhere else, and they may not even, stay in Canada. So I do worry about that, and I think if we are going to have sustainable long run economic growth, we're going to have to figure out a solution for both Toronto and Vancouver. So, middle class millennials and Gen Z, or Gen Z, I should say, being Canadian, so they can afford to live there.
Well, I think we'll leave it on that note for today. Thank you very much, Mike, for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. And we look forward to possibly having you on for a future episode, probably on this topic again, because I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Well, absolutely. We can, when there is a sort of housing price correction, we can come back on this and see how many of my predictions were wrong.
Will do. That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.